Case 1. Susan Smith. Union County, South Carolina, October 25, 1994. There are moments in the history of a community that split time in two. There is the world that existed before, and the world that had to be rebuilt after. For the small city of Union, South Carolina, that moment arrived on the evening of October 25, 1994, when a young mother pulled her burgundy Mazda to the edge of a boat ramp at John D. Long Lake and made a decision that would send shockwaves through the entire nation. Her name was Susan Smith. She was 23 years old. She was a mother of two, and within 9 days, she would become the center of one of the most closely watched and emotionally devastating criminal cases in American history. Union, South Carolina is the kind of place where people know their neighbors. It sits in the Piedmont region of the state, a community built on textile mills and quiet residential streets, where front porches are still used and children play outside until the streetlights come on. In 1994, the population hovered around 10,000 people. Crime was not absent, but it was not the defining feature of daily life. People trusted each other. They trusted the systems around them. And when Susan Smith appeared on local television on the night of October 25th, tearful and shaking, to report that a black man had carjacked her vehicle with her two young sons still strapped inside, Union County believed her. Susan Smith was born Susan Lee Vaughn in Union, South Carolina, on September 26, 1971. Her childhood was marked by instability and tragedy from an early age. Her parents divorced when she was 6 years old, and the years that followed introduced her to circumstances no child should have to navigate. By her own account and the accounts of those who knew her, Susan grew up searching for stability, for love, and for a sense of belonging that always seemed just out of reach. She married David Smith in March of 1991, when she was 19 years old. Their union produced two sons, Michael Daniel Smith, born on October 10, 1991, and Alexander Tyler Smith, born on August 5, 1993. By the autumn of 1994, the marriage between Susan and David had deteriorated. They had separated and were in the process of divorce. Susan had begun a romantic relationship with a man named Tom Finley, the son of a prominent Union County business owner. By all appearances, Tom Finley represented the kind of future Susan had always wanted: financial security, social standing, and the promise of a life that looked different from the one she had been living. But in October of 1994, Tom Finley sent Susan a letter. In that letter, he made clear that he was not ready for a relationship that included raising another man's children. For Susan Smith, that letter became a turning point. What happened on the evening of October 25, 1994, was reconstructed through Susan's own eventual confession, physical evidence gathered by law enforcement, and the testimony of witnesses. According to the account that emerged through the investigation, Susan drove her two sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander, to the John D. Long Lake, located approximately 7 miles outside of Union. The boys were strapped into their car seats in the back of the vehicle, as they would have been on any ordinary drive. At the lake, Susan positioned the car at the top of the boat ramp, released the brake, and allowed the vehicle to roll forward and into the water. She then walked away from the lake and flagged down help at a nearby home. When she arrived at the residence of Rick and Shirley McLeod, Susan Smith told them that a black man had forced her from her car and driven away with her children still inside. She was hysterical, by all accounts, weeping, shaking, barely able to speak. The McLeod family called law enforcement immediately, and within hours, the story of a carjacking in Union County was spreading across local media. By the following morning, it had reached national news. The investigation that followed was led by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, in coordination with the Union County Sheriff's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. From the earliest stages, investigators found themselves navigating a case that was both heartbreaking and, in certain respects, troubling. The description Susan provided of her attacker was vague. There were no witnesses to the alleged carjacking. Security footage from the area was reviewed and showed Susan's vehicle passing through a red light at a location that did not align with a carjacker fleeing the scene. And as the days passed, trained investigators began to notice subtle inconsistencies in Susan's account that they could not reconcile with the physical evidence available to them. For 9 days, Susan Smith appeared before television cameras and pleaded for the safe return of her children. The nation watched. Vigils were held in Union. Millions of people followed the case on the evening news. The image of Susan Smith, tearful and clutching photographs of Michael and Alexander, became one of the most recognizable images of that autumn. Law enforcement was simultaneously conducting one of the largest searches in South Carolina history, canvassing roads, waterways, and surrounding counties in an effort to locate the vehicle and the children. Throughout this period, investigators from SLED were quietly narrowing their focus. Sheriff Howard Wells, who had known Susan Smith personally for years, was among those who came to believe that the story she had told did not reflect what had actually occurred. Under careful and methodical questioning, the investigation turned inward towards Susan herself. On November 3, 1994, 9 days after she had reported the alleged carjacking, Susan Smith sat across from Sheriff Wells and confessed. She told investigators where the vehicle was. She told them what she had done. Dive teams entered John D. Long Lake and located the Mazda within hours of the confession. Both Michael and Alexander were found still strapped into their car seats. The vehicle had traveled approximately 100 feet from the boat ramp before coming to rest on the lake floor in approximately 18 feet of water. The community of Union, South Carolina, and the watching nation was confronted with a grief that had no adequate language. The arrest of Susan Smith set in motion one of the most closely watched trials of the 1990s. The prosecution, led by Solicitor Tommy Pope, sought the death penalty. The defense, led by attorneys David Bruck and Judy Clark, argued that Susan Smith was a deeply troubled woman whose history of trauma, mental health struggles, and desperate circumstances had led to a profound breakdown. The trial began on July 10, 1995, in Union County. The prosecution presented the physical evidence, the trajectory of the vehicle, the timeline of events, the letter from Tom Finley, and Susan's own confession. They argued that what occurred on the evening of October 25th was not the act of a woman in psychological crisis, but a deliberate act carried out by someone who had made a calculated choice. The defense countered with a portrait of a woman who had experienced significant trauma throughout her life, who had struggled with depression, and who had been failed by systems that might have intervened before that night at the lake. The jury deliberated for approximately 2.5 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on 2 counts of murder on July 22, 1995. The sentencing phase followed immediately. After hearing testimony from both sides regarding whether Susan Smith should face execution or life in prison, the jury returned with a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She was 23 years old when she was sentenced. She would not be eligible to seek parole until she had served 3 decades. Susan Smith was remanded to the Women's Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina, where she has remained. Her incarceration has not been without incident. Over the years, multiple disciplinary actions were documented within the institution, including relationships with correctional officers that led to internal investigations and dismissals. Each time these incidents became public, they renewed national attention on a case that had never truly faded from the American consciousness. In November of 2024, Susan Smith appeared before a South Carolina parole board for the first time. She had now served 30 years of her sentence. The hearing drew significant public attention, with victim advocates, family members, and members of the public submitting testimony on both sides. The parole board reviewed her institutional record, the nature of the crimes for which she was convicted, and the submissions they had received. After deliberation, the board denied Susan Smith parole. She remains incarcerated at the Women's Correctional Institution in South Carolina. The legacy of this case extends far beyond the courtroom. In the years following the trial, researchers, psychologists, and child welfare advocates pointed to the Susan Smith case as a catalyst for significant changes in how law enforcement approaches reports of missing children, how media covers such cases before facts are established, and how communities grapple with the reality that harm can come from within the family unit. The case also prompted broader conversations about the mental health resources available to young parents, the warning signs that those around a struggling individual can learn to recognize, and the ways in which systems of support, family, community, professional, can sometimes fail at the most critical moments. For the people of Union, South Carolina, the healing process was long and, in many ways, never fully complete. A memorial was established at John D. Long Lake, where people leave flowers, toys, and handwritten notes in memory of Michael and Alexander Smith. The lake itself became a place of quiet reflection, a place where people come not to assign blame or rehearse the details of what happened, but simply to remember two small boys whose lives were cut short before they had truly begun. Michael was 3 years old. Alexander was 14 months. They deserved every year that was taken from them. And in Union County, South Carolina, and in communities far beyond it, they are not forgotten. The justice system spoke clearly in this case. The accountability that Michael and Alexander deserved was delivered through the courts, and the legal process that followed their loss stands as a testament to the principle that the most vulnerable members of our communities, our children, will be advocated for, even when the harm comes from the most unexpected of places. If you or someone you know has concerns about the safety and well-being of a child, please reach out to the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. You do not have to have all the answers. You only have to make the call. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why cases like this must never be forgotten, please take a moment right now to give this video a like, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and make sure you are subscribed to Cold Case Hour so you never miss an episode. Your support keeps this work going. Case 2, Shaquan Duley. Orangeburg County, South Carolina, August 16, 2010. There are cases that challenge everything we think we understand about the bond between a parent and a child. Cases that force investigators, prosecutors, and entire communities to sit with questions that have no comfortable answers. The case of Shaquan Duley, which came to the attention of law enforcement in Orangeburg County, South Carolina, on the morning of August 16, 2010, is one of those cases. It is a case rooted not in sudden violence, but in a slow accumulation of pressure, despair, and ultimately a set of choices that resulted in the loss of two young lives and permanently altered the trajectory of a family and a community. Orangeburg County sits in the central portion of South Carolina, approximately 60 miles southeast of Columbia. It is a county with a rich history, home to two historically black colleges, a strong civic tradition, and communities that have weathered significant challenges across generations. In the summer of 2010, it was a community like many others across the rural South, navigating economic pressures, stretched social services, and the kind of quiet struggles that rarely make headlines until something forces them into the light. Shaquan Duley was 29 years old in the summer of 2010. She was a mother of 3 children, living in circumstances that had grown increasingly difficult. She was unemployed and had been for some time. Financial pressures had reached a point that felt, by her own later account, insurmountable. She was staying temporarily at the Extended Stay America Motel on St. Matthews Road in Orangeburg, a situation that reflected the instability that had come to define her daily life. Her children, 2-year-old Devine and 18-month-old Javan, were with her. A third child, an older son, was not present that night. The events of August 16, 2010, were reconstructed through the subsequent investigation by the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office, SLED, and the account that Duley herself provided to law enforcement. According to investigators, Duley took the lives of both Devine and Javan inside the motel room. She then placed the bodies of her 2 sons inside her vehicle. In the early morning hours, she drove to a rural stretch of road near the North Edisto River and staged a scenario designed to appear as though the vehicle had gone off the road and into the water. She then reported to emergency services that her vehicle had crashed into the river with her children inside. First responders arrived at the scene and immediately began recovery efforts. The vehicle was located in the North Edisto River. The bodies of Devine and Javan were recovered from inside. Initial indications at the scene raised questions among investigators that were not consistent with an accidental vehicle crash. The positioning of the children, the physical evidence inside the vehicle, and details of the surrounding scene prompted law enforcement to look more closely at the circumstances being presented to them. Shaquan Duley was taken in for questioning. The investigation moved quickly. Within hours of speaking with law enforcement, Duley provided a confession. She acknowledged what had occurred inside the motel room. She acknowledged placing her sons in the vehicle. She acknowledged driving to the river and staging the scene to appear as an accident. The confession was detailed, and it was corroborated by the physical evidence recovered from both the motel room and the vehicle. The arrest of Shaquan Duley sent an immediate shockwave through Orangeburg County. The details of the case were devastating. Two toddlers, 2-year-old Devine and 18-month-old Javan, had been in a motel room with their mother on what should have been just another summer night. Instead, they did not survive that night. And the staging of the scene at the North Edisto River meant that for the first hours following the discovery of the vehicle, those responding to the scene believed they were working an accident, not a crime scene. It was only through the careful and methodical work of investigators that the full picture came into focus. The prosecution of Shaquan Duley was handled by the Orangeburg County courts. The case moved through the legal system against the backdrop of significant public attention, both locally and nationally. The details were stark. 2 children, both under the age of 3, both entirely dependent on the adult who was responsible for their care, had lost their lives. And the woman responsible for their care was the same woman who had then attempted to conceal what had occurred by engineering a false narrative at a rural riverbank. Throughout the legal proceedings, questions were raised, as they are in cases involving this level of tragedy, about the circumstances that preceded the night of August 16th. Duley's defense team presented information about her mental and emotional state, the economic pressure she had been under, and the absence of support systems that might have intervened. Prosecutors acknowledged the complexity of those circumstances while maintaining that the choices made on the night in question and the deliberate actions taken afterward to conceal the truth represented conduct for which the law demanded full accountability. Shaquan Duley entered a guilty plea. She was sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was imposed by the Orangeburg County Court and reflected both the severity of the conduct and the court's determination that the children who had lost their lives deserved the full weight of the justice system's response. The Duley case prompted a sustained conversation in South Carolina and beyond about the intersection of poverty, mental health, and the availability of crisis intervention resources for young parents. Advocates pointed to the case as evidence of what can happen when a parent in crisis has no accessible pathway to help, no hotline that feels reachable, no social worker who has made a recent visit, no family member close enough to see the warning signs. It is a conversation that has not yet produced all the answers it demands. But the case made clear that the conversation must continue. Devine was 2 years old. Javan was 18 months old. They were old enough to laugh and play and recognize the sound of their mother's voice. They deserved every year that was taken from them, and then many more beyond that. In Orangeburg County and in the broader South Carolina community that followed this case, their names and their lives are remembered with tenderness and with grief. The accountability that their short lives deserved was delivered through the courts. The sentence imposed reflects the judgment of the legal system that the lives of children are among the most precious things this society is asked to protect. And in courtrooms, in child welfare offices, and in communities across South Carolina, the lesson of this case, that no parent should ever have to face a crisis alone, and that the cost of leaving them to face it alone can be irreversible, continues to inform the work of those who dedicate themselves to keeping children safe. If you are a parent or caregiver who is feeling overwhelmed, please know that help is available. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453 is staffed around the clock by trained counselors who can connect you with local resources. You do not have to be in danger to call. You only have to be struggling. If this case stayed with you, if it made you think about the children in your community who deserve our protection and our attention, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every subscriber helps us keep telling these stories for the people who can no longer tell them for themselves. Case 3, Jennifer Lynn Sahr. Horry County, South Carolina, December 4, 2008. Not every case that passes through the criminal justice system involves a name that becomes widely known. Not every case generates the kind of national coverage that sustains public memory across decades. Some cases are carried almost entirely by the communities closest to them, by the investigators who worked the scene, the prosecutors who built the case, the advocates who refused to let the story be forgotten, and the ordinary people who heard the details and could not look away. The case that came to be known as the Baby Boy Horry case is one of those. And the woman at the center of it, Jennifer Lynn Sahr, is a figure whose choices on a cold December morning in 2008 set in motion a legal journey that would not reach its final resolution for nearly 15 years. Horry County stretches along the northeastern coast of South Carolina, bordered to the north by North Carolina and to the east by the Atlantic Ocean. The county seat is Conway, a historic river town with deep roots in the region's agricultural and civic history. But Horry County is perhaps most widely known as the home of Myrtle Beach, one of the most visited tourist destinations on the East Coast. In December of 2008, as the tourist season wound down and the county settled into its quieter winter rhythms, a roadside discovery on Highway 544 would pull this community into a case it would never fully set aside. On December 4, 2008, a passerby traveling along Highway 544 in Horry County made a discovery that would immediately draw law enforcement to the scene. A box had been left on the side of the road. Inside the box was a newborn infant, a baby boy, hours old, alive when placed there but exposed to the December cold. Investigators and emergency responders arrived quickly. Despite their best efforts, the infant did not survive. He had been exposed to the elements for long enough that hypothermia had taken hold. A life that had just begun, a life measured not in years or months, but in hours, was over. Law enforcement initiated an immediate investigation. A newborn found in a box on a roadside in December is not an ambiguous scene. Someone had placed that child there. Someone had made a deliberate choice to leave a living infant in a cardboard box on the side of a highway in cold weather. The question of who that person was, and what had led to that morning on Highway 544, became the central task of the Horry County investigation. The investigation required both forensic work and community outreach. Investigators worked to identify the mother through biological evidence and through the careful canvassing of medical and community resources in the area. The child, referred to throughout the investigation and subsequent legal proceedings as baby boy Horry, had been born without any record of a hospital birth. There was no birth certificate, no medical file, no name. He existed in the documentary record only as the subject of a criminal investigation. That reality, perhaps more than any other detail of this case, spoke to the complete isolation in which this child had entered and left the world. The investigation eventually led law enforcement to Jennifer Lynn Sahr. The identification process took time, as cases involving unregistered births and abandoned newborns often do. But the forensic and investigative work ultimately produced a match. Sahr was identified as the mother of baby boy Horry. She was brought in for questioning, and the details of what had occurred on the morning of December 4, 2008, began to emerge. What the investigation revealed was a portrait of a young woman who had concealed her pregnancy and who, facing circumstances she felt she could not navigate, had made a series of decisions that culminated in leaving her newborn son on a roadside in December. The legal system was now tasked with determining how to respond, how to hold accountable, within the framework of the law, a set of choices that had ended a life before it had truly started. Here it is important to pause and acknowledge something that child welfare advocates have consistently raised in the context of cases involving newborn abandonment. South Carolina, like all 50 states, has a safe haven law. South Carolina's safe haven statute allows a parent to surrender a newborn infant, without legal consequence, to any hospital, fire station, or law enforcement facility in the state. The existence of this law means that there is always a legal, safe, and anonymous pathway available for a parent who feels they cannot care for a newborn. Baby boy Horry did not have to die on the side of Highway 544. The law provided a different path, and that path was not taken. The criminal case against Jennifer Lynn Sahr did not resolve quickly. It moved through the Horry County court system over a period of years, navigating legal processes, procedural steps, and the complexities that often attend cases involving this particular set of circumstances. The case drew attention from child welfare advocates in South Carolina, who saw it as an opportunity to increase public awareness of the state's safe haven law, to ensure that no future parent would be unaware that a safe and legal option existed. In 2023, nearly 15 years after the morning on Highway 544, Jennifer Lynn Sahr was convicted of voluntary manslaughter in the Horry County court system. The conviction came after a legal process that had stretched across more than a decade, through continuances, legal challenges, and the slow grinding of the wheels of justice. The judge sentenced Sahr to 4 years, reflecting the court's weighing of the specific circumstances of the case against the framework of the voluntary manslaughter charge. The sentence drew a range of responses. Some felt it was insufficient given the life that had been lost. Others pointed to the length of time Sahr had lived with the legal process and the circumstances that had surrounded the original events. Child welfare advocates, for their part, largely focused their public statements not on the sentence itself, but on the continuing work of ensuring that South Carolina's safe haven law was known, understood, and accessible to every parent who might ever need it. Baby boy Horry was never given a name by the people who should have given him one. But he was given one, in a sense, by the community that carried his case, by the investigators who worked his case with care, by the advocates who refused to let his story disappear, and by the people of Horry County who learned his story and chose to remember it. He was 1 day old. He deserved a name. He deserved a life. And in the memory of those who followed this case, he is both. The legal accountability delivered through the Horry County courts in 2023 does not undo what was lost on a cold December morning in 2008. But it affirms the principle that every life, regardless of how brief, regardless of how unrecorded, matters to the justice system and to the communities that system is designed to protect. If you are a parent or know someone facing a crisis pregnancy situation, please know that South Carolina's safe haven law allows any parent to safely surrender a newborn at any hospital, fire station, or law enforcement agency without legal consequence. You can also contact the National Safe Haven Alliance at 1-888-510-BABY. Help us there. You only have to reach for it. Please take a moment to like this video, drop a comment below letting us know your thoughts on this case, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour if you have not already. These stories exist to make sure the people who cannot speak for themselves are never forgotten. Case 4. Jamie Michele Bradley-Brun. Beaufort County, South Carolina, May 19, 2023. There are cases that arrive in a community like a sudden rupture. Cases that upend the ordinary texture of daily life and force everyone who hears the details to reckon with a reality they would rather not accept. The case of Jamie Michele Bradley-Brun, which came before the Beaufort County law enforcement community on May 19, 2023, is one of those cases. It is a case involving choices made inside a family home that resulted in the loss of one child's life and came within moments of claiming another. And it is a case whose resolution, delivered through the Beaufort County court system in December of 2025, was shaped not only by the evidence gathered by investigators, but by the courage of a child who intervened when intervention was most needed. Beaufort County occupies the southern coastal region of South Carolina, a place of salt marshes, sea islands, and communities that carry layers of history going back centuries. The county seat, Beaufort, is one of the oldest cities in the United States. The broader county encompasses communities including Hilton Head Island, Bluffton, and a network of barrier islands connected by causeways and bridges. It is an area that draws both longtime residents and newcomers, a place where military families stationed at the nearby Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort have long been woven into the fabric of community life. Jamie Michele Bradley-Brun was a resident of Beaufort County at the time of the events that came to light on May 19, 2023. She was the mother of multiple children. What occurred inside the family home on that May morning was reconstructed through the investigation conducted by the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office, the physical evidence gathered at the scene, the medical examinations of the children involved, and, critically, the account provided by one of the children who was present that day. According to the investigation, on the morning of May 19, 2023, 6-year-old Michele Bradley-Brun lost her life inside the family home. The manner in which she lost her life was the subject of the criminal charges that followed, and it was established through forensic examination and the subsequent legal proceedings. Alongside Michele was her 8-year-old sister, who was also placed in grave danger that morning before the situation was brought to a stop. The person who stopped it was the oldest child present, a child who, by the account of investigators, intervened at a moment when every second counted. Law enforcement arrived at the scene and immediately began the work of understanding what had taken place inside that home. The investigation was intensive and methodical. Physical evidence was gathered, medical examinations were conducted, and the accounts of the children who had been present were carefully documented by trained investigators and child welfare professionals. What emerged from that investigative process was the basis for the criminal charges that were filed against Jamie Michele Bradley-Brun. She was arrested and charged in connection with the events of May 19, 2023. The charges reflected what investigators and prosecutors had determined had occurred that morning in the family home. Charges that would ultimately be adjudicated through the Beaufort County court system over the months and years that followed. The legal proceedings in the Bradley-Brun case moved through the Beaufort County courts against a backdrop of community attention and deep concern. Cases involving the harm of young children by a parent are among the most difficult that any court system is asked to manage. They require investigators and prosecutors to present evidence in a way that honors the dignity of the victims, protects the well-being of child witnesses, and meets the evidentiary standards required for a just outcome. In the Bradley-Brun case, the prosecution built its case on the physical evidence gathered at the scene, the medical findings relating to Michele, and the testimony that emerged from the careful documentation of what the children who were present had witnessed. Throughout the proceedings, the legal system also had to grapple with the role of the oldest child, the one who had intervened. That child's actions on the morning of May 19th had been an act of extraordinary presence of mind under circumstances no child should ever face. The weight of what that child carried, having witnessed what occurred, having intervened, having then had to navigate the legal and social aftermath, was a dimension of this case that advocates and child welfare professionals pointed to as a reminder of the ripple effects that travel outward from a single act of harm within a family. In December of 2025, Jamie Michele Bradley-Brun was sentenced in Beaufort County. The sentence handed down was 80 years, 50 years for the murder of 6-year-old Michele, and 30 years for the attempted harm done to her 8-year-old sister. The two portions of the sentence were to run consecutively, meaning that the full weight of 80 years was imposed without the possibility of concurrent reduction. It was one of the most significant sentences handed down in a child harm case in recent South Carolina history, and it reflected the court's unambiguous judgment about the severity of what had occurred inside that Beaufort County home on May 19, 2023. The sentencing drew responses from child welfare advocates, legal professionals, and members of the broader community who had followed the case since its earliest stages. Many pointed to the 80-year sentence as a reflection of the principle that the legal system will impose its most serious consequences when the most vulnerable members of society, children entirely dependent on the adults responsible for them, are the victims. Others reflected on the oldest child's intervention and what it meant that a child had been placed in a position where such an intervention was necessary at all. Michele Bradley-Brun was 6 years old. She was at an age where the world is a place of discovery, where school is new, where friendships are forming, where the future is a wide and open landscape. She deserved every year of that landscape. She deserved to grow up. And the courts of Beaufort County, South Carolina, in delivering the sentence of December 2025, affirmed with the full weight of the law that her life mattered, that what was done to her demanded the most serious response the legal system could provide, and that the justice owed to her would not be diminished. For the children who survived, for the 8-year-old who came so close to sharing her sister's fate, and for the oldest child whose courage stopped the morning from becoming something even more unthinkable, the path forward involves a kind of resilience that no child should be asked to find. Child welfare advocates and trauma professionals who work with children who have survived family violence emphasize that these children carry their experiences with them, and that the quality and consistency of the support systems around them in the years that follow are among the most important determinants of their long-term well-being. This case is a reminder that within the walls of any home, children may be navigating circumstances that the outside world cannot see. It is a reminder that the adults around a family, teachers, neighbors, family members, community figures, carry a shared responsibility to pay attention, to ask questions when something feels wrong, and to make the call that might change everything. If you have concerns about the safety of a child, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Trained crisis counselors are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Your call could save a life. If this case moved you, if Michele's story and the courage of her sibling left a mark on you, please give this video a like, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your engagement tells the platform that these stories matter, and it helps us make sure they keep reaching the people who need to hear them. Case 5, Vernita L. Jones. Edgefield County, South Carolina, November 24, 2018. Every case that passes through the criminal justice system begins with a set of facts, a date, a location, a name, a set of circumstances that law enforcement is called upon to investigate, that prosecutors are called upon to present, and that courts are called upon to adjudicate. But behind every set of facts is a human story, a story of lives intersecting in ways that produced outcomes no one watching from the outside can fully comprehend. The case of Vernita L. Jones, which came before the Edgefield County law enforcement community on or around November 24, 2018, is a case where the facts are stark, the outcome is devastating, and the legal response that followed reflects the full seriousness with which South Carolina's criminal justice system treats the loss of a child's life. Edgefield County is a small, rural county in the western portion of South Carolina, situated near the Georgia border. It is perhaps best known historically as the birthplace of Strom Thurmond and as a county with a long and complex political history. In modern times, it is a quiet agricultural community, home to approximately 27,000 people, where law enforcement resources are modest and the criminal justice system is closely watched by a population that values accountability and order. When a case of the nature of the Vernita Jones investigation arrives in a county like Edgefield, it is felt throughout the community in ways that are both immediate and lasting. Vernita L. Jones was the mother of a 6-month-old son named Anthony Frost. Anthony was an infant, at 6 months old, entirely dependent on the adult caregivers in his life for every aspect of his survival. He could not feed himself, could not seek help, could not communicate his needs through language. He was, in every sense, at the complete mercy of the adults responsible for his care. On or around November 24, 2018, a date that carries particular resonance as it falls near the Thanksgiving holiday, a time when family and community are supposed to be at the center of daily life, Anthony Frost lost his life. The discovery of Anthony's remains was not immediate. It was the result of an investigation that began when Anthony was reported missing or when his absence from the context where he should have been visible prompted concern. The details that emerged through the investigation by Edgefield County law enforcement and the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division were deeply troubling. Anthony's body had been discarded, placed in a dumpster at a location in Edgefield County. His remains were subsequently found in a landfill in Greenville County, having traveled there through the normal operation of waste removal systems. The fact that the remains were ultimately located reflects the careful and persistent work of investigators who refused to close the case without a full accounting of what had happened to Anthony Frost. The investigation that followed the discovery of Anthony's remains focused on the circumstances of his death and on the individuals who had been responsible for his care. Vernita L. Jones emerged as the central figure in that investigation. Through the forensic and investigative work conducted by law enforcement, the case against her was built on evidence that connected her to the harm done to Anthony and to the subsequent actions taken to conceal what had occurred. Jones was arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse, a charge under South Carolina law that reflects a specific set of circumstances in which a child in the care or custody of an adult loses their life as a result of abuse or grossly negligent conduct. The charge carries significant penalties under South Carolina statute, reflecting the legislature's judgment that the lives of children in the care of adults demand the highest standard of protection that the law can provide. The case moved through the Edgefield County court system with the careful attention that a case involving the death of an infant demands. The prosecution presented the evidence gathered through the investigation, including the forensic findings relating to Anthony's cause of death, the circumstances of how his remains were discovered, and the investigative work that connected those circumstances to Vernita Jones. The legal proceedings required the court to engage with evidence that was, by its nature, deeply distressing, evidence of harm done to a 6-month-old child and of subsequent efforts to conceal that harm. Vernita L. Jones was convicted of homicide by child abuse and sentenced to 30 years in prison. The sentence was imposed by the Edgefield County Court and reflected the court's judgment that the full weight of the law must be brought to bear in cases where a child in a parent's care does not survive that care. 30 years represents a significant portion of a human life, a measure of accountability that the court determined was appropriate given the nature of the conduct established by the evidence. The Vernita Jones case raises questions that child welfare advocates have raised in counties across South Carolina and across the country. What were the systems that surrounded Anthony Frost in the 6 months of his life, and what, if anything, could have intervened before November of 2018? Were there visits by health workers? Were there family members who expressed concern? Were there agencies or professionals who had contact with the household and whose records might reveal earlier warning signs? These questions are not raised to assign blame beyond the person who was held legally accountable. They are raised because they point toward the possibility of prevention, toward the idea that if the systems surrounding a vulnerable infant are functioning the way they are designed to function, the outcome might be different. Anthony Frost was 6 months old. He had been in the world for half a year, long enough to have begun to recognize faces, to respond to voices, to experience the world in the earliest and most fundamental ways. He deserved every month and every year that came after those first 6. He deserved to grow up in Edgefield County, South Carolina, to know his community, to build a life. And in the sentence delivered by the court, in the 30 years of accountability imposed on the person responsible for his death, the legal system affirmed that his brief life had value, that the harm done to him demanded a serious response, and that the people of South Carolina would not look away from what had happened to him. The discovery of Anthony's remains in a Greenville County landfill is itself a detail that speaks to the complete vulnerability of infants in our society. He had no voice. He could not seek help. He could not tell anyone what was happening. The only voice he had was the voice of the investigators who refused to stop looking, the prosecutors who refused to let the case be set aside, and the court that affirmed his worth through the sentence it imposed. Child welfare is a community responsibility. The protection of children depends not only on the formal systems of law enforcement, child protective services, and the courts, but on the network of informal observers, neighbors, family members, healthcare providers, teachers, and ordinary people who are positioned to notice when something is wrong and to act on what they notice. If you have concerns about the welfare of a child, please do not hesitate to contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453 or your local Child Protective Services agency. You do not need certainty to make a report. You need only concern. Please give this video a like, share Anthony's story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour so you never miss an episode. Every view and every subscriber is a voice that says these stories matter and these children will not be forgotten. Case 6, Stephanie Irene Greene. Spartanburg County, South Carolina, November 13, 2010. Among the cases that make their way through the South Carolina criminal justice system each year, there are some that challenge not only our moral and emotional frameworks, but our understanding of the responsibilities that come with professional expertise. The case of Stephanie Irene Greene, which came to the attention of law enforcement in Spartanburg County, South Carolina, in November of 2010, is one of those cases. It is a case involving a 46-day-old infant, a mother with a professional medical background, and a set of choices made in secret that produced an outcome no infant should ever face. And it is a case that, in the years since it was adjudicated through the Spartanburg County courts, has been studied by medical professionals, legal scholars, and child welfare advocates as an example of the ways in which concealment and deception can place even the most seemingly ordinary family circumstances on a path toward irreversible tragedy. Spartanburg County is located in the northwestern corner of South Carolina, in a region known as the Upstate. It is an area with a strong manufacturing heritage, a growing medical and educational sector anchored by institutions like Spartanburg Regional Healthcare System and Wofford College, and a diverse and active community spread across both the city of Spartanburg and the surrounding county. In the autumn of 2010, it was a community going about the ordinary rhythms of life, one that was about to be confronted with a case that would receive national medical and legal attention. Stephanie Irene Greene was a registered nurse at the time of the events that came to light in November of 2010. Her professional background in healthcare gave her a level of medical knowledge that the average person does not possess. She was the mother of a daughter named Alexis, who was 46 days old on November 13, 2010. A 46-day-old infant is a newborn in every meaningful sense, entirely dependent, entirely unable to advocate for herself, entirely reliant on the adults in her immediate world for every aspect of her survival and well-being. On November 13, 2010, Alexis Greene did not survive. She was 46 days old. The circumstances of her passing became the subject of an investigation by Spartanburg County law enforcement and medical examiners. And what that investigation revealed was the basis for one of the most unusual and closely watched criminal cases in South Carolina's recent legal history. The forensic investigation into Alexis's passing revealed that the infant had been exposed to a toxic level of morphine and a combination of other substances. The pathway through which this exposure occurred was identified as the breast milk through which Alexis was being fed. Greene was breastfeeding her daughter, and the investigation established that Greene had been using morphine, a controlled substance, without the knowledge of the physicians and healthcare providers managing her postpartum care. She had actively concealed her substance use from the medical professionals around her. The result of that concealed use was that the milk through which Alexis received nourishment contained levels of morphine that were lethal for a 46-day-old infant. The case raised immediate and significant questions that went well beyond the criminal proceedings. Medical professionals and toxicologists who examined the findings pointed to the case as a stark illustration of the risks associated with substance use during the breastfeeding period. Risks that are compounded when the individual using substances has the professional knowledge to conceal their use from medical oversight. Greene's background as a registered nurse meant that she understood, or should have understood, the physiological consequences of what she was doing. The concealment of her substance use from her treating physicians was not a passive omission. It was an active and sustained deception carried out by someone with professional knowledge of the medical system she was navigating. The prosecution of Stephanie Irene Greene in Spartanburg County engaged with these complexities directly. The case required the court to assess not only the physical evidence of what had been found in Alexis's system and in the breast milk that had been analyzed, but the intentionality, or at minimum, the recklessness, behind the sustained concealment that had preceded Alexis's passing. Prosecutors argued that Greene's professional background made her fully aware of the risk she was creating for her infant daughter, and that the sustained deception of her healthcare providers was itself evidence of an awareness of that risk. The defense raised issues related to Greene's history of substance dependency and the circumstances that had led to the continuation of her use during the postpartum period. It was a defense that sought to place the events in the context of a disease process, addiction, rather than in the context of deliberate harm. But the court ultimately found, through the presentation of evidence and the application of South Carolina law, that the conduct established by the evidence met the standard required for the charges that had been brought. Stephanie Irene Greene was convicted of homicide by child abuse and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The sentence was imposed by the Spartanburg County Court and reflected the seriousness with which the court viewed the loss of Alexis Greene's life and the circumstances through which that loss had occurred. The case drew attention from nursing boards, medical professional associations, and healthcare educators who pointed to it as an example of the consequences of concealing substance use from medical providers, not only for the individual involved, but for the dependents in their care. In the years since the Greene case was adjudicated, it has been referenced in medical and legal literature as one of a small number of cases involving the transmission of substances through breast milk at levels sufficient to produce a fatal outcome in an infant. Medical researchers and child health advocates have pointed to the case in the context of calls for better screening, better support resources for parents struggling with substance dependency in the postpartum period, and better systems for ensuring that the medical information a new parent is sharing with their healthcare team reflects the full reality of their situation. Alexis Greene was 46 days old. She had been in the world for less than 7 weeks, long enough for those who knew her to have begun to know her face, her sounds, her particular way of moving through the earliest days of life. She deserved every day beyond those 46. She deserved to grow up. And in the sentence imposed by the Spartanburg County Court, the legal system affirmed that her brief life had value that demanded accountability, that the circumstances of her passing required a serious response, and that the professional knowledge of the person responsible for her care made the conduct in this case all the more serious in the eyes of the law. For healthcare providers, the Greene case is a reminder of the importance of creating clinical environments in which patients feel safe to disclose substance use during the postpartum period without fear of immediate and punitive consequences. Environments in which the primary response to disclosure is treatment and support, and in which the safety of both the parent and the infant can be protected through honest communication rather than concealment. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance use during pregnancy or the postpartum period, please reach out to SAMHSA's national helpline at 1-800-662-4357. The line is free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Help us there. Please give this video a like, leave a comment below with your thoughts on this case, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support makes it possible for these stories to continue being told. Case 7. Joyce Renee Stover. Chester County, South Carolina, October 30th, 2021. There is a particular weight that attaches to cases involving infants. Cases where the victim is at the very beginning of life, where the loss is measured not only in what was taken, but in everything that never had the chance to begin. The case of Joyce Renee Stover, which came before the Chester County law enforcement community on October 30th, 2021, carries that weight in full. It is a case involving an 11-month-old girl named Nova, a household in which substances were present and accessible, and a legal proceeding that ultimately resulted in a 35-year sentence for homicide by child abuse. A sentence that reflected the Chester County Court's unambiguous judgment about the gravity of what had occurred on that October day. Chester County is situated in the northern portion of South Carolina, roughly equidistant between Charlotte, North Carolina, and Columbia, South Carolina. It is a county of approximately 33,000 people, with an economy historically rooted in textiles and agriculture, and more recently shaped by the same economic transitions that have touched much of rural South Carolina. The county seat, also named Chester, is a small city whose downtown carries the architectural traces of its antebellum and industrial heritage. It is a community where child welfare cases are taken seriously, and where the institutions of law enforcement and the courts have navigated some of the most difficult dimensions of family and community life. Joyce Renee Stover was the mother of Nova Stover, who was 11 months old on October 30th, 2021. Nova was an infant at the threshold of her first birthday. At 11 months, beginning to pull herself upright, exploring the world in the expanding ways that mark the transition from early infancy to toddlerhood. She was entirely dependent on the adults in her life. She was in every sense of the word a baby. On October 30th, 2021, Nova did not survive. She was found unresponsive, and emergency responders were called to the scene. The medical examination and subsequent investigation revealed that Nova had been exposed to fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that is extraordinarily potent and that represents, at even trace levels, an acute danger to an infant's system. The investigation established that Nova had come into contact with fentanyl in the environment in which she was present that day. Among the items recovered from the scene was a Narcan device found in the baby's crib, a detail that speaks to the presence of substances in the household and to an awareness, on the part of some adult, of the risks that presence created. The investigation by Chester County law enforcement and SLED was thorough and methodical. The physical evidence recovered at the scene, the medical findings, and the investigative work conducted in the days and weeks following October 30th built a picture of the circumstances that had led to Nova's passing. Joyce Renee Stover emerged from that investigation as the person responsible, and she was arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse under South Carolina law. The case moved through the Chester County courts over the period following the arrest. Homicide by child abuse cases involving substance exposure require the prosecution to establish the connection between the presence and accessibility of the substance in question and the harm done to the child, a legal and evidentiary task that draws on forensic toxicology, scene investigation, and the testimony of experts who can translate complex medical and chemical findings into terms that a court can apply to the legal standards required for conviction. In August of 2023, Joyce Renee Stover was sentenced to 35 years in prison for homicide by child abuse. The sentence was imposed by the Chester County Court and reflected the gravity of the findings that had emerged from the investigation and the legal proceedings. The discovery of Narcan in an 11-month-old's crib, a detail that no words can fully make ordinary, was part of the context in which the court rendered its judgment. The Stover case is part of a broader and deeply troubling pattern that has emerged in South Carolina and across the United States in recent years, a pattern in which infants and young children in households where opioids and other substances are present are placed at acute risk through accidental ingestion or exposure. Law enforcement agencies, child protective services, and child welfare advocates have pointed to this pattern as one of the most urgent child safety challenges of the current era. The extraordinary potency of fentanyl, measured in micrograms rather than milligrams, means that amounts invisible to the naked eye can be lethal for an infant whose system has none of the physiological tolerance that an adult with a substance use disorder may have developed. The response to this pattern requires action at multiple levels. It requires law enforcement to treat every case of infant harm in a substance-present household with the full rigor of investigation. It requires child protective services to have the tools, the resources, and the training to identify households where infants are at risk before a tragedy occurs. And it requires communities to have honest and open conversations about substance use, the risks it creates for the most vulnerable people in households where it is present, and the resources available to those who want help. Nova Stover was 11 months old. She was 1 month away from her first birthday. From the candles, the cake, the photographs that mark a child's transition from infancy to toddlerhood and that parents keep for the rest of their lives. She deserved that birthday. She deserved every one that would have followed. And in the 35-year sentence imposed by the Chester County Court in August of 2023, the legal system affirmed that her 11 months of life had a value that demanded the full weight of accountability, and that the circumstances of her passing required a response that reflected the severity of what had been lost. For every family navigating substance use issues in a household with young children, the message of cases like Nova's is clear and urgent. Children cannot protect themselves. They cannot move away from danger, cannot call for help, cannot make choices about the environments in which they are placed. The adults around them carry that responsibility completely. If you or someone you know is struggling with opioid use and there are children in the home, please contact SAMHSA's national helpline at 1-800-662-4357. Help is confidential, free, and available around the clock. And if you have concerns about the safety of a child, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Please give this video a like, leave a comment below in memory of Nova, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support makes sure these stories reach the people who need to hear them. Case 8, Tricia Yazici. Sumter County, South Carolina, October 19, 2020. Among the most difficult and morally complex questions that the criminal justice system is asked to answer are those that arise when the harm done to a child occurs before that child has drawn their first breath. When the choices made by a parent during a pregnancy produce consequences that a newborn cannot survive. These cases sit at the intersection of public health, criminal law, and child welfare policy in ways that courts and communities have been navigating with increasing frequency in recent years. The case of Tricia Yazici, which came before the Sumter County law enforcement community beginning on October 19, 2020, is one of those cases, a case involving a premature birth, a positive drug test, and a newborn who did not survive the day of their birth. Sumter County is located in the central portion of South Carolina, approximately 45 miles east of Columbia. It is a county with a significant military presence, anchored by Shaw Air Force Base, and a community that reflects the diversity and the challenges of rural South Carolina in the 21st century. The county seat, also named Sumter, has a population of approximately 40,000 and serves as the commercial and administrative center of the surrounding region. Child welfare cases in Sumter County are managed through a combination of county law enforcement, the Department of Social Services, and the medical institutions that serve the area's population. Tricia Yazici came to the attention of law enforcement and medical authorities on October 19, 2020, when she gave birth at a Sumter County medical facility. The birth was premature. The infant was born at approximately 25 weeks of gestation, placing the child well within the range of extreme prematurity that requires immediate and intensive neonatal medical intervention. Premature infants born at 25 weeks face extraordinary challenges simply by virtue of their early arrival, and the medical teams that receive such infants are trained to provide the most intensive level of care available. In the course of that care, medical staff conducted standard testing. The results of that testing revealed that the premature infant had been exposed to methamphetamine in utero. The child did not survive. The infant passed away on the same day as the birth. The combination of the challenges associated with extreme prematurity and the additional physiological burden created by prenatal substance exposure having proven unsurvivable. The death of the infant triggered a notification to law enforcement, as it is required to do under South Carolina law when a child's passing occurs under circumstances that suggest criminal conduct may be involved. The Sumter County investigation that followed focused on the prenatal circumstances, on the substance use that the medical evidence had established had occurred during the pregnancy, and on the legal framework under which that conduct could be addressed through the criminal justice system. In January of 2021, Tricia Yazici was charged with homicide by child abuse in Sumter County. The charge reflected South Carolina's legal framework for cases in which a child's death is connected to the conduct of the person responsible for the child's care, a framework that has been applied in South Carolina and other states to cases involving prenatal substance exposure when that exposure is connected to a child's death. The Yazici case reflects a broader legal and public health debate that has intensified significantly in the era of the opioid crisis and the methamphetamine epidemic. Child welfare advocates, medical professionals, public defenders, and prosecutors have engaged in sustained and sometimes contentious discussions about the appropriate role of the criminal justice system in addressing prenatal substance exposure. Those who advocate for a primarily public health response argue that criminalization discourages pregnant individuals with substance use disorders from seeking prenatal care, thereby increasing rather than decreasing the risk to their children. Those who support criminal accountability in cases involving infant death argue that the law must reflect the community's judgment that the life of a child, including a child who has not yet been born, has a value that demands accountability when it is lost. The resolution of the charges against Tricia Yazici in Sumter County is not fully documented in the available public record at the time of this documentary's production. What is documented is the charge, homicide by child abuse, and the circumstances that prompted it. The full legal outcome of the case may continue to work its way through the Sumter County court system. What is beyond dispute is the loss at the center of this case. A premature infant who was born into the world already carrying the consequences of choices made before birth, and who did not survive that first day. Whatever one's view of the appropriate legal response to prenatal substance exposure, the loss of that child, 25 weeks into a life that barely had the chance to begin, is a loss that demands acknowledgement, reflection, and a commitment to doing better. The public health dimension of this case points toward prevention. Pregnancy is a moment in the life cycle when individuals with substance use disorders often have the highest motivation to seek and engage with treatment. Research consistently shows that when accessible, non-judgmental treatment is available to pregnant individuals with substance use disorders, the outcomes for both parent and child improve significantly. Investment in accessible treatment, in prenatal care outreach, and in the kinds of support services that meet people where they are, rather than waiting for them to reach a crisis point, is one of the most evidence-based investments a community can make in the safety and well-being of its most vulnerable future citizens. If you are pregnant and struggling with substance use, please know that help is available and that asking for help is an act of courage. SAMHSA's national helpline at 1-800-662-4357 is confidential, free, and available every hour of every day. You are not alone. Please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear these stories, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Thank you for being part of a community that refuses to look away from the cases that matter most. Case 9, Jamie Tiana Price. Greenville County, South Carolina, June 19, 2025. As this documentary moves into its most recent cases whose legal proceedings were still unfolding as this episode was being produced, it is important to acknowledge what it means to cover a case that is still working its way through the court system. The facts presented here are drawn from law enforcement records, court documents, and verified news coverage available as of April of 2026. The charges described are charges. They represent the judgment of law enforcement and prosecutors about what the evidence shows, and they will be tested through the legal process that follows. In a society that values the presumption of innocence within its judicial proceedings, that distinction matters. What does not require adjudication is the loss at the center of this case. A 6-month-old infant in Greenville County, South Carolina, who did not survive June 19, 2025. Greenville County is the most populous county in South Carolina, anchored by the city of Greenville, which has undergone a remarkable transformation over the past 3 decades from a post-industrial city navigating economic decline to one of the most frequently cited examples of urban revitalization in the American South. The city's downtown, its cultural institutions, and its growing economy have made it a destination. But like every large county, Greenville encompasses communities that are navigating circumstances far removed from the restaurants and galleries of its revitalized downtown. Communities where poverty, substance use, and the absence of adequate social support create conditions in which children are at risk. Tiana Price was the mother of a 6-month-old infant at the time of the events that came to light on June 19, 2025. What occurred on that date, and what investigators discovered when they responded to the scene, was the basis for the charges that were subsequently filed against Price in Greenville County. According to the account established by law enforcement, Price had placed her 6-month-old infant in a sleeping environment that investigators determined was unsafe, while Price herself was under the influence of cocaine. The infant was found unresponsive. Emergency responders were called to the scene. Despite their efforts, the infant did not survive. When law enforcement arrived to conduct the investigation, the condition of the home was described in official documents as deplorable, a word that carries legal and investigative significance beyond its ordinary usage, reflecting conditions that investigators determined fell well below the standard of care required for an infant. A 6-month-old infant placed in an unsafe sleeping environment is at risk of a set of well-documented outcomes that the pediatric and child safety communities have worked extensively to prevent. Safe sleep guidelines, developed over decades of research and distributed through pediatric healthcare providers, hospitals, and community organizations, are designed specifically to protect infants from the risks that arise when they are placed in environments where their airway may be compromised, their body temperature may be affected, or their ability to move in response to physiological distress is restricted. When an adult responsible for an infant's care is under the influence of substances, their ability to monitor an infant's safety, to respond to signs of distress, and to maintain the kind of attentive presence that an infant requires is fundamentally compromised. Tiana Price was charged with involuntary manslaughter and unlawful conduct toward a child in Greenville County. These charges reflect the legal framework through which the criminal justice system addresses situations where a child's death results from conduct that, while not necessarily intentional, represents a level of recklessness or negligence that the law holds criminally accountable. As of April of 2026, the legal proceedings in the Price case are ongoing, and the full judicial outcome has not yet been determined. The Price case arrives in the context of a national and statewide conversation about safe sleep, substance use, and the resources available to parents who are struggling. Child welfare advocates in Greenville County and across South Carolina have pointed to cases like this one as evidence of the need for sustained investment in the kinds of community-based support services that can reach parents before a crisis occurs. Home visiting programs, substance use treatment that accommodates parents with young children, and community health worker programs that build relationships with families in high-risk circumstances over time. The research on these interventions is clear. Early, consistent, relationship-based support for parents with young children in high-risk circumstances significantly reduces the likelihood of the kinds of tragic outcomes that this documentary has been examining. It is not a complete solution, no single intervention is, but it is an evidence-based response to a pattern that communities across South Carolina and the country have been watching unfold. The infant at the center of the Price case was 6 months old, the same age as Anthony Frost in Edgefield County, the same age as the infant in the Yazici case in Sumter County. 6 months old, at the beginning of everything, entirely dependent, entirely trusting of the adults whose responsibility it was to keep them safe. These infants did not have the ability to seek help. They could not make calls. They could not leave. They depended entirely on the adults around them. The cases in this documentary exist as a record of what can happen when that dependence is betrayed, and as a call to the communities that hear these stories to build the kinds of systems and relationships that can prevent the next case from ever reaching a courtroom. If you have concerns about the safety of an infant or child in your community, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. If you are a parent struggling with substance use, please contact SAMHSA at 1-800-662-4357. Help is available, and it can make all the difference. Please give this video a like, share it with your community, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Thank you for watching and for caring about the children whose stories we tell here. Case 10, Sara Shakeri-Taylor. Charleston County, South Carolina, May 20th, 2024. The final case in this documentary arrives from Charleston County, from a coastal community that in many ways represents the face that South Carolina presents to the world, with its historic architecture, its celebrated cuisine, and its position as one of the most visited cities in the American South. Charleston is a city of layers, of history and beauty and the weight of a past that its residents continue to navigate with varying degrees of reflection and honesty. It is also, like every city, a place where the most difficult dimensions of human experience are present beneath the surface that visitors typically see. The case of Sara Shakeri-Taylor, which came to the attention of law enforcement in Charleston County on May 20th, 2024, pulled one of those difficult dimensions into full view. Charleston County is the third most populous county in South Carolina, home to approximately 400,000 residents spread across the city of Charleston and the surrounding communities that extend inland from the harbor. The county encompasses neighborhoods of extraordinary wealth and neighborhoods navigating persistent poverty, and the gap between those realities is one that child welfare advocates, public health professionals, and community organizers in Charleston have been working to address for decades. The Charleston County Sheriff's Office and the Charleston Police Department are among the law enforcement agencies responsible for responding to incidents across this diverse and complex landscape. Sara Shakeri-Taylor was the mother of a 10-month-old daughter at the time of the events that came to light on May 20th, 2024. Her daughter was 10 months old, approaching the threshold of her first year of life, at an age when infants are becoming more mobile, more expressive, more fully present in the world around them. A 10-month-old is a person in every meaningful sense, a small person with a developing personality, preferences, and an entire future ahead. On May 20th, 2024, Sara Shakeri-Taylor's 10-month-old daughter did not survive. The circumstances that brought law enforcement to the scene and triggered the investigation that followed were, from the earliest stages, complex and disturbing. The forensic examination of the infant established that the child had been exposed to fentanyl at a level that the child's system could not survive. Fentanyl, the same synthetic opioid that appeared in the Chester County case of Joyce Renee Stover, and that has been a central feature of child harm cases across the country in recent years, was present in the home and had been accessible to a 10-month-old who had no ability to protect herself from it. But the investigation into the death of Sara Shakeri-Taylor's daughter did not end with the forensic findings related to the child's passing. As investigators conducted the broader examination of the property and the circumstances of the household, they uncovered evidence that extended the investigation in a direction that few child harm cases take. On the property, investigators discovered evidence consistent with an alleged dogfighting operation, materials, animals, and conditions that law enforcement determined warranted additional charges relating to animal fighting under South Carolina statute. The presence of an alleged dogfighting operation on the same property where a 10-month-old child was being raised added a dimension to this case that deepened the concerns about the environment in which this child had been living. Sara Shakeri-Taylor was charged with homicide by child abuse in connection with her daughter's passing, and with animal fighting charges relating to the alleged dogfighting operation discovered during the investigation. The charges were filed in August of 2024, following the investigative work conducted by law enforcement in the months after May 20th. As of April of 2026, the legal proceedings in the Shakeri-Taylor case are ongoing in the Charleston County court system, and the full judicial outcome remains to be determined. The combination of charges in the Shakeri-Taylor case is unusual, and it prompts reflection on what the totality of the circumstances reveals about the environment in which her daughter was living. A home where fentanyl is present and accessible. A property where the evidence of an alleged animal fighting operation was discovered. A 10-month-old navigating that environment with no ability to understand the risks it posed or to seek safety from them. Child welfare professionals who work with families in high-risk environments often speak of what they call cumulative risk, the way in which multiple risk factors present simultaneously in a child's environment compound each other, creating a level of danger that is greater than any single factor would represent on its own. The circumstances alleged in the Shakeri-Taylor case represent a stark illustration of that concept. The investigation and prosecution of this case in Charleston County reflects the commitment of South Carolina's law enforcement and judicial institutions to pursuing accountability in the most complex and multidimensional child harm cases. Cases where the harm to a child is entangled with other forms of illegal conduct, and where the full picture of what occurred requires investigators to follow multiple evidentiary threads to their conclusions. The child at the center of this case was 10 months old. She was 1-month-old Alexis Greene's elder by nearly a year of life. She had had 10 months of the world, 10 months of experience, of growth, of the kind of early human development that leaves traces in the neurological architecture of a child long after the specific memories have faded. She deserved every month and every year that followed those 10. She deserved to grow up in Charleston County, to know the smell of the ocean, to become whatever she would have become. And in the charges filed in August of 2024, and in the legal proceedings that followed, the Charleston County justice system affirmed that her life had a value that demanded a full and rigorous accounting of the circumstances that ended it. This case is the last in a documentary that has traveled the length and breadth of South Carolina, from the Piedmont to the upstate, from the coast to the Midlands, from the most rural counties to the most urban. Each case has been different in its specifics. Each has involved different people, different circumstances, different legal frameworks, and different communities. But across all 10, a common thread runs: the extraordinary vulnerability of children and the weight of the responsibility that adults who bring children into the world carry for their safety and their lives. South Carolina's courts, law enforcement agencies, and child welfare institutions have shown, in case after case, that they will pursue accountability when a child's life is lost. That commitment to accountability is essential, but it is not sufficient on its own. Accountability after the fact cannot restore a life that has been lost. The work of making South Carolina's children safer happens before the cases reach the courtroom, in the quality of the support services available to struggling families, in the accessibility of substance use treatment for parents who need it, in the strength of the community networks that surround vulnerable households, and in the willingness of neighbors, family members, teachers, and healthcare providers to pay attention and to act when something feels wrong. The children in this documentary, Michael and Alexander, Devine and Javan, baby boy Hori, Michele, Anthony, Alexis, Nova, and the infants whose names could not be included in the public record, were not statistics. They were not case numbers. They were children. They were people at the very beginning of what should have been long and full lives. They deserved every day they were denied. And in the memory of every person who hears their stories and is moved to do something, to make a call, to check on a neighbor, to support a struggling parent, to advocate for better resources in their community, their short lives continue to matter. South Carolina's safe haven law allows any parent to surrender a newborn infant at any hospital, fire station, or law enforcement agency without legal consequence. If you know someone in a crisis situation involving a newborn, please share that information. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available at 1-800-422-4453. SAMHSA's Substance Use Helpline is available at 1-800-662-4357. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available at 1-800-799-7233. These resources exist because communities have decided that prevention matters. Use them. Share them. Let the people around you know they exist. Thank you for spending this time with Cold Case Hour. If this documentary moved you, if it made you think differently about the children in your community and the systems designed to protect them, please give this video a like, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and make sure you are subscribed to Cold Case Hour so you never miss an episode. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Your engagement makes it possible for this channel to keep doing this work, to keep telling the stories of people who can no longer tell them for themselves. We will be back with another episode soon. Until then, thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of this community.